The security cameras at Morrison Industries captured everything that happened that Tuesday morning in November. What they recorded would change 2 lives forever and reveal the true character of one of America's most powerful CEOs. Sarah Martinez had no idea when she stepped into that gleaming corporate tower with her 3-month-old daughter Emma that she was about to collapse, both physically and emotionally, in front of the one person who could either destroy her completely or save her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The glass elevator climbed silently toward the 42nd floor of Morrison Industries headquarters in downtown Chicago. Sarah Martinez pressed her back against the cool metal wall, trying to steady her breathing while her daughter Emma slept peacefully in the worn baby carrier strapped to her chest. The numbers on the display climbed higher: 38, 39, 40, and with each floor, Sarah felt her heart hammering harder against her ribs. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. The $27 in her wallet had to last until Friday, and Emma needed formula more than Sarah needed food. The baby had been crying most of the night, probably sensing her mother's stress, and Sarah had paced their tiny studio apartment until dawn broke over the city skyline. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the pristine marble lobby of the executive floor. Everything here screamed money and power, from the imported Italian leather furniture to the original paintings that probably cost more than Sarah had made in her entire life. She stepped out on shaking legs, Emma's weight feeling heavier with each step toward the reception desk. "I'm here to see Mr. Morrison," Sarah said to the perfectly groomed receptionist whose nameplate read Catherine Phillips. Her voice came out smaller than intended, barely above a whisper. Catherine looked up from her computer screen, her expression shifting from professional politeness to barely concealed disdain as she took in Sarah's appearance. The young mother wore her only decent outfit, a navy blue dress she'd bought at Goodwill 3 months ago, now hanging loose on her frame from the weight she'd lost since Emma's birth. Her shoes, once black patent leather, were scuffed and worn, thin at the heels. "Do you have an appointment?" Catherine's tone was crisp, dismissive. "No, but I really need to speak with him. It's urgent." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "It's about Daniel Morrison." Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Daniel Morrison? Are you referring to Mr. Morrison's son?" Sarah nodded, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Yes, I was his girlfriend. This is his daughter." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Catherine's eyes moved from Sarah's face to the sleeping baby, then back again. Her expression hardened further. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison doesn't see anyone without an appointment. If you'd like to schedule, please." The word came out as a desperate plea. "I just need 5 minutes. I've been trying to reach him for weeks, but his assistants keep hanging up on me. I don't know where else to turn." Catherine's fingers moved across her keyboard with sharp, staccato clicks. "Mr. Morrison is extremely busy. Perhaps you should contact our legal department if you have some sort of ... claim." Sarah felt the walls of the reception area pressing in around her. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the air too thin. Emma stirred against her chest, making small whimpering sounds that meant she would wake up hungry soon. And Sarah had no idea how she would manage another feeding when her own body was running on empty. "I'm not here for money," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength born of desperation. "Daniel ... He died 3 weeks ago. In Afghanistan. I thought Mr. Morrison should know about his granddaughter." Catherine's fingers stopped moving. For the first time, her professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been surprising or concerning. "I am sorry for your loss, but I still can't. Catherine, what's going on out here?" The voice came from behind Sarah, deep and authoritative. She turned to see a man in his late 50s approaching from the hallway that led to the corner office. Thomas Morrison was exactly what Sarah had expected: tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His presence filled the space like a force of nature, commanding attention without effort, but it was his eyes that caught Sarah off guard. They were the same shade of deep brown as Daniel's, the same eyes that had looked at her with such tenderness during their brief time together before his deployment. "Mr. Morrison," Catherine stood quickly, "this young woman claims to be... Well, she says she was involved with your son Daniel, and that this baby..." Thomas's gaze moved to Sarah, then down to the infant in her arms. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just curiosity. "What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez." She straightened her shoulders, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I was with Daniel before he deployed. This is Emma. She's his daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas studied her face. With the intensity of a man accustomed to reading people, to detecting lies and half-truths in boardroom negotiations. Sarah met his gaze steadily, despite the trembling in her hands. "Daniel never mentioned you," he said finally. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah had expected this, had prepared for it during the sleepless nights when she'd rehearsed this conversation in her head. But hearing it spoken aloud by the man whose eyes were so much like Daniel's made her chest tighten with renewed grief. "We only dated for 6 months before he left," she said quietly. "He wanted to wait until he came home to tell you about us. He said you had very specific ideas about the kind of woman he should be with." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And you're claiming this child is his?" "I'm not claiming anything. I'm telling you the truth." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "Daniel James Morrison, born March 15, 1995. He had a scar on his left shoulder from when he fell off his bike at age 8. He used to talk about how you taught him to drive in your '67 Mustang, and how he was terrified he'd scratch the paint. He wanted to be a teacher before he enlisted, but he felt like he had to prove himself to you first." Thomas's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his hands clench slightly at his sides. These were details only someone close to Daniel would know. Intimate memories shared in quiet moments between two people who had loved each other. "Even if what you're saying is true," Thomas said, his voice carefully controlled, "what exactly do you want from me?" The question Sarah had been dreading. She looked down at Emma, who was beginning to wake up, her tiny face scrunching in preparation for a cry. In a few hours, Sarah would have to choose between buying formula and paying the electric bill. Her job at the diner had cut her hours after she'd missed too many shifts due to Emma's illness last month. The eviction notice was already taped to her apartment door. "I don't want anything," she said, and meant it. "I just thought you should know she exists. Daniel talked about you constantly. He loved you despite how complicated things were between you two. I thought you might want to know that part of him is still here." Emma's whimper turned into a full cry, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Sarah began the gentle swaying motion that sometimes soothed her daughter, but she could feel her own strength ebbing. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of grief and exhaustion, of trying to figure out how to be a single mother while processing the loss of the man she'd planned to build a life with. "When did you last eat?" Thomas asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Sarah almost didn't answer. Yesterday. I'm fine." "No, you're not." His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind but not gentle either. "You look like you're about to fall over." As if summoned by his words, Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The bright lights overhead seemed to pulse and blur. Emma's crying grew louder, more insistent, and Sarah realized with growing panic that she didn't have the strength to comfort her own child. "I should go," she said, taking a step toward the elevator. "I'm sorry to have bothered you." But as she turned, the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The last thing she remembered was Thomas Morrison's voice, sharp with concern, calling her name as darkness closed in around her, When Sarah opened her eyes, she was lying on a leather couch in what appeared to be a spacious office. The walls were lined with bookshelves and awards, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Chicago skyline stretching toward Lake Michigan. Emma was nowhere to be seen, and panic shot through her like electricity. "Emma!" She tried to sit up quickly, but gentle hands pressed her back down. "She's fine." Thomas Morrison's voice came from somewhere to her right. "My assistant is feeding her in the conference room." Sarah turned her head to see him sitting in a chair beside the couch, his tie loosened and his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. In his hands, he held a picture of Daniel in his army uniform, smiling broadly at the two. "Camera. This was taken at his graduation from basic training," Thomas said quietly. "He sent it to me with a letter. The first real letter he'd written to me since he was 12 years old." Sarah struggled to sit up, and this time he didn't stop. He was so proud of that uniform. He said it was the first time he felt like he might actually be worthy of the Morrison name. Thomas looked up from the photograph, his eyes meeting hers. "He really said that. He said a lot of things about you. Not all of them were easy to hear, but they all came from a place of love. He just wanted you to be proud of him." "I was proud of him." The words came out rough, as if they'd been stuck in his throat for years. "I was always proud of him. I didn't know how to show it in a way he could understand." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken regrets filling the space between them. From somewhere down the hall, Sarah could hear Emma's content babbling, the sound she made when she was being held and fed, safe and cared for. "She has his eyes," Thomas said finally. Sarah nodded. "And his stubbornness. She's only 3 months old, but she already knows exactly what she wants and isn't afraid to demand it." A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "That definitely sounds like Daniel, Mr. Morrison," Sarah began, then stopped. She didn't know how to finish the sentence, didn't know what she was asking for, or even what she wanted from this conversation. "Thomas," he said quietly, "if you're the mother of my granddaughter, I think we can dispense with the formalities." The word granddaughter seemed to surprise him as much as it did Sarah. He looked down at the photograph again, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. "I failed him," he said, so quietly Sarah almost didn't hear it. "I spent so much time trying to make him strong, trying to prepare him for a world that would test him, that I forgot to just love him, to tell him that he was enough, exactly as he was." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "He knew, Thomas. Maybe not in the way you wished. He did, but he knew. On the night before he deployed, he told me that everything he was doing was to make you proud. That even if he never lived up to your expectations, at least he could try to die worthy of being your son." Thomas's hand tightened on the photograph frame. He was always worthy. From the moment he was born, he was worthy of everything good in this world. Then why couldn't you tell him that? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of missed opportunities and unspoken words. Thomas set the photograph down on the table beside him and looked out the window at the city below. "Because my father never told me," he said simply, and his father never told him. The Morrison men were not good at the softer things. We show love through achievement, through providing, through building legacies, but we never learned how to just say the words. Sarah understood then, in a way she hadn't before. The cycle of fathers and sons, each generation trying to do better than the last, but carrying forward the same fundamental wounds. Daniel had talked about breaking that cycle, about being different if he ever had children of his own. He would have been different, she said. With Emma, I mean. He would have broken the pattern. Yes, Thomas agreed. He would have. The door to the office opened, and Catherine entered carrying Emma, who was now clean, fed, and dressed in what appeared to be a brand new outfit. The baby was alert and content, her dark eyes taking in the new surroundings with the curiosity of someone discovering the world for the first time. "She's beautiful," Catherine said, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine warmth. "And she definitely has the Morrison chin." Thomas stood and walked over to them, his movements careful and uncertain. "May I?" he asked Sarah. Sarah nodded, and Thomas reached out to take Emma from Catherine's arms. The baby studied his face solemnly for a moment, then reached up with one tiny hand to grab his finger. The transformation in Thomas's expression was immediate, and profound, years of carefully controlled emotions cracking open to reveal something raw and vulnerable underneath. "Hello, Emma," he whispered. "I'm your grandfather." The words seemed to break something loose inside him. Sarah watched as this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of lives simply melted in the presence of his granddaughter. Emma gurgled happily, completely unaware of the magnitude of the moment she had just created. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the uncertainty that had settled over Sarah's world. She stood in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the business card Thomas Morrison had pressed into her hand before his driver took her home the previous evening. The embossed letters seemed to mock her, Morrison Industries, with a phone number that connected directly to one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Emma lay on the second-hand changing table, kicking her legs happily after her morning feeding. The formula Thomas had arranged to be delivered sat on the kitchen counter, enough to last 2 weeks, along with diapers, baby clothes, and other supplies Sarah couldn't have afforded. It should have felt like a blessing, but instead, it left her feeling exposed and uncertain. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Driver will arrive at 9 a.m. We need to talk." "Thomas," Sarah checked the time. 8:30. She had barely enough time to make herself presentable, though she wondered why she was bothering. Thomas had already seen her at her worst, collapsing from exhaustion and hunger in his pristine office. What more damage could honest conversation do? The black sedan arrived precisely at 9, as promised. The driver, a kind-faced man in his 60s named Frank, helped her secure Emma's car seat and spoke gently about his own grandchildren during the ride through downtown Chicago. It was a small kindness that helped calm Sarah's nerves as they pulled up to Morrison Industries. This time, Catherine greeted them at the elevator with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Sarah. Emma looks well rested today." The change in treatment was jarring. Yesterday, Catherine had looked at Sarah like she was something unpleasant tracked in on someone's shoe. Now she cooed over Emma and led them directly to Thomas's office without the hostile reception routine. Thomas was standing by the windows when they entered, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city. He turned when he heard them, and Sarah was struck again by how much his eyes resembled Daniel's, especially in the morning light. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "Please sit." Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, Emma content in her carrier. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unfinished conversations and questions neither seemed ready to ask. "I didn't sleep last night," Thomas said finally. "I kept thinking about what you said, about Daniel wanting to wait to tell me about you. About him feeling like he had to prove himself worthy of our family name." Sarah waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "I called his commanding officer, Colonel Peterson. He told me things about Daniel's service that weren't in the official reports." Thomas's voice grew thick. "Did you know he volunteered for the mission that killed him? It wasn't his assignment. Another soldier was supposed to go, but Daniel stepped up because the man had a newborn at home." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known Daniel died in an IED explosion while on patrol, but she hadn't known the details. Hadn't wanted to know them. "He saved 3 Afghan children that day," Thomas continued. "Got them to safety before the blast. Peterson said Daniel talked about Emma constantly in those last weeks. Showed everyone her ultrasound pictures. He was planning to propose when he came home. Sarah's hand flew to her throat, where a simple silver chain held the ring Daniel had given her, not an engagement ring, but a promise ring with a small diamond that caught the light. He did propose, she whispered, the night before he deployed. I told him to ask me again when he came home safely, that we had all the time in the world. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for your loss, and for the way I've handled this. You came to me yesterday, not asking for anything except recognition, and I treated you like a threat to be managed. You were protecting yourself, Sarah said quietly. I understand that. Losing Daniel ... It broke something in all of us. No, Thomas shook his head firmly. What I did yesterday was inexcusable. You were grieving and desperate, and I was so caught up in my own pain that I couldn't see yours. He paused, then added, I want to make this right, not just for Emma, but for Daniel. And for you. Sarah felt a flutter of warning in her chest. What do you mean? Thomas moved to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. I've had my legal team draw up some documents. A trust fund for Emma's education and future needs. Health insurance through the company, and if you're willing. He hesitated, then forged. Ahead, there's a position open in our community outreach department. Good salary, benefits, flexible hours for new mothers. The offer hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at the folder, her mind racing. It was everything she needed: financial security, healthcare, a future for Emma. But it also felt like charity, like pity dressed up in corporate terminology. I don't want your guilt money, she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. Thomas's expression didn't change. It's not guilt money, it's family money. Emma is my granddaughter, which makes her a Morrison whether either of us is comfortable with that fact or not. But what about me? I'm not a Morrison. I'm just the girl who got pregnant by your son. No, Thomas's voice was firm. You're the woman my son loved enough to propose to. You're the mother of my granddaughter. And from what I observed yesterday, you're someone with strength and integrity who's been trying to do right by her child under impossible circumstances. Emma chose that moment to wake up, her soft cries filling the tension in the room. Sarah lifted her from the carrier, settling her against her shoulder with practiced ease. The baby's presence seemed to shift something in the atmosphere, reminding both adults of what was truly important. I need time to think, Sarah said finally. Of course. But while you're thinking, I want you to know something. Thomas opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. These were Daniel's, his personal effects from overseas. I thought you should have them. With shaking hands, Sarah opened the box. Inside were Daniel's dog tags, his watch, and a small notebook, filled with his handwriting. She opened it to a random page and saw her own name written over and over, along with sketches of Emma's ultrasound images and lists of baby names. Page 43, Thomas said quietly. Sarah flipped to the indicated page and found a letter. Addressed to her. Sarah, if you're reading this, then something's happened to me and Dad finally gave you my stuff. I hope he wasn't too much of a bastard about it. I know how he can be with people he thinks aren't good enough for the Morrison name, but you're better than all of us combined. I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You made me believe I could be different. From him, that I could break the cycle of Morrison men who are better at building walls than bridges. You made me want to come home. I love Emma already, even though I haven't met her yet. Love her enough that I'm terrified I won't be good enough for her. But if something happens to me, I need you to promise me something. Don't let her grow up thinking she's not worthy of love. Don't let her inherit the Morrison curse of never feeling like enough. And Sarah ... Don't shut Dad out completely. I know. He's difficult, but he's not evil. He just never learned how to love people without trying to control them. Maybe Emma can teach him what he couldn't learn from me. I love you both more than I have words for. Daniel. Sarah was crying before she finished reading, tears dropping onto the pages Daniel had written in some forward operating base half a world away. Thomas had moved to the window again, giving her privacy for her grief. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he knew this might happen. Daniel always was perceptive, Thomas said without turning around. Even as a child, he could read people better than I ever could. It's why he was such a good soldier, and why he would have been an excellent father. Sarah closed the notebook carefully, holding it against her chest like a lifeline. What was he like? As a little boy, I mean. He told me some stories, but... Thomas turned back to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, his professional mask slipped completely away. He was fearless, absolutely fearless. Used to climb trees that were twice his height, jump his bike over makeshift ramps. That should have killed him. He had this laugh. God, his laugh could fill a room. A genuine smile crossed Thomas's face. When he was 7, he decided he wanted to be a firefighter. Spent the entire summer carrying around this plastic fire hat and rescuing the neighbor's cat from various predicaments. The cat learned to hide whenever it saw Daniel coming. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. He never told me about the firefighter phase. There was also the dinosaur paleontologist phase, the astronaut phase, and a brief but intense period where he wanted to be a professional wrestler named the Devastating Daniel. Thomas's expression grew more serious. He was always trying to save something or someone, always looking for ways to be a hero. Is that why he enlisted? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Partly, but mostly, I think he enlisted because I made him feel like he had to prove himself worthy of being my son. I was so focused on toughening him up, on preparing him for the world I knew, that I forgot to appreciate the world he saw. Emma had fallen back asleep, her tiny fist curled around Sarah's finger. Looking down at her daughter, Sarah tried to imagine Daniel as a child, climbing trees and rescuing cats, already showing signs of the man who would volunteer for a dangerous mission to save others. I want to show you something, Thomas said suddenly. He walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a photo album Sarah hadn't noticed before. I had Catherine put this together last night. Pictures of Daniel growing up. He opened the album on his desk and Sarah leaned forward to look. The first photo showed a grinning toddler with chocolate cake smeared across his face. The next showed a gap-toothed 6-year-old holding a trophy for Little League baseball. Page after page of Daniel's life: birthday parties, family vacations, school plays, graduation ceremonies. He looks so happy, Sarah murmured, studying a photo of teenage Daniel laughing at something off camera. He was, for the most part. It wasn't until high school that things became complicated between us. I started pushing him harder, expecting more. I wanted him to be ready for Harvard, ready for the business world, ready to take over the company. Someday, Thomas traced the edge of one photo with his finger. I never asked him what he wanted to be ready for. Sarah turned the page and found photos from Daniel's military graduation, his face serious under his dress uniform cap. In the background, she could see Thomas, looking proud but distant. Were you proud of him when he enlisted? Terrified, Thomas admitted, but yes, proud. He was making his own choice for the first time in his life, and it was a choice to serve something bigger than himself. How could I not be proud of that? Did you tell him? Thomas's silence was answer enough. They continued through the album, Sarah learning pieces of Daniel's history she'd never known. His love of model airplanes, his habit of rescuing stray animals, his unexpected talent for cooking that had emerged during a high school home economics class. I want Emma to know all of this, Sarah said as they reached the end of the album. I want her to know what kind of person her father was, not just how he died. Then let me be part of her life, Thomas said simply. Let me tell her these stories. Let me be the grandfather Daniel would have wanted for her. Sarah looked down at Emma, then back at Thomas. The offer was tempting, not just for the financial security, but for the chance to give Emma a connection to her father's family. But it also meant trusting a man she barely knew, entering a world where she would always be the outsider. "I'm not asking you to decide today," Thomas continued. "Take the job or don't take it. Accept the trust fund or refuse it. But please, please don't take Emma away from me before I've had a chance to know her. Before I've had a chance to be better than I was with Daniel." The vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable. This powerful man who commanded respect and fear in boardrooms across the country was asking, almost begging, for a chance to be a grandfather. "There would have to be boundaries," Sarah said slowly. "I won't have you trying to control how I raise her or making me feel like I'm not good enough for your family." "Agreed. And I won't take charity. If I work for your company, it's because I've earned the position, not because of who Emma's father was." "The position is real, Sarah. We've been looking for someone to head our new family services initiative for months. Your background in social work makes you qualified, and your personal experience gives you perspective we need." Sarah blinked in surprise. "How did you know about my social work background?" Thomas had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have had Catherine do some research after you left yesterday. Nothing invasive," he added quickly. "Just public records, your college transcripts, work history. You graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in social work. You've spent the last 3 years working with at-risk families and single mothers. You're exactly the kind of person we need for this program." Despite everything, Sarah felt a spark of interest. "What kind of family services, support for employees with young children? On-site childcare, lactation support, flexible scheduling, emergency backup care. We want Morrison Industries to be a place where people can build careers without sacrificing their families." Thomas paused. "It was Daniel's idea, actually. He wrote me a letter about it during his last deployment. Said he wanted Emma to grow up in a world where parents didn't have to choose between providing for their children and being present for them." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Daniel had been planning their future even from halfway around the world, thinking about the kind of company he wanted his daughter to know her grandfather ran. "You would have implemented his ideas anyway," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, but I'd rather implement them with someone who understands their importance on a personal level. Someone who knew Daniel and shares his vision for what families should be." Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, making the small sounds that meant she would be hungry soon. As if sensing the shift, Thomas moved to a small refrigerator Sarah hadn't noticed and pulled out a bottle of formula. "May I?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. She watched as Thomas settled into his chair and held out his arms for Emma. The baby went to him easily, as if she somehow recognized the genetic connection. Thomas held the bottle with the careful precision of someone who had done this before, long ago. "You're a natural," Sarah observed. "I fed Daniel plenty of bottles when he was small. His mother, Eleanor. She struggled with postpartum depression. I learned to manage midnight feedings and diaper changes out of necessity." Thomas's voice grew soft. "Some of my best memories with Daniel are from those quiet hours when it was just the two of us, him trusting me completely to meet his needs." "What happened? Between you two, I mean." Daniel said things got complicated, but he never went into detail. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma drink her bottle with single-minded focus. "I think I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid that if I loved him too openly, too completely, I would make him soft. The business world is brutal, Sarah. Men who show weakness get destroyed. I thought I was preparing him for that reality. But he wasn't going into business. He wanted to teach. I know that now." But at the time, all I could see was my son choosing a path that would never give him the security and power I thought he needed to survive. Thomas looked up at Sarah. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was especially wrong about teaching. There's no profession more important than shaping young minds, helping them discover their potential. Emma finished her bottle and Thomas shifted her to his shoulder, patting her back with the gentle rhythm of remembered practice. Sarah watched this powerful CEO transformed into a tender grandfather and felt something shift in her own heart. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I'll take the job. On a trial basis. 3 months to see if we can make this work, the job, Emma knowing you, all of it. But the first time you make me feel like I'm not good enough, the first time you try to parent my child or control my choices, I'm gone." Thomas's face lit up with genuine joy. "You won't regret this decision, Sarah, I promise you that." As if in agreement, Emma let out a satisfied burp that made both adults laugh. It was a small moment, but it felt like the beginning of something new, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment and the shared love of one little girl, who carried her father's eyes and her grandfather's stubborn chin. Outside the windows of Morrison Industries, Chicago bustled with its usual energy. But inside Thomas Morrison's office, 3 lives were quietly rearranging themselves around the possibility of healing, of second chances, and of love that transcends the boundaries of grief and loss. 3 weeks into her new position at Morrison Industries, Sarah was beginning to understand why the company commanded such respect in the business world. The Family Services Initiative she now headed was just one of dozens of progressive programs Thomas had quietly implemented over the years. Employee mental health support, continuing education grants, emergency hardship funds, all operating with minimal fanfare but maximum impact. Her office on the 38th floor overlooked the Chicago River, a view she still couldn't quite believe belonged to her workspace. Emma's portable crib sat in the corner, surrounded by toys that seemed to multiply daily thanks to various employees who had taken to stopping by with something small for the baby. Marcus Williams, the head of HR, knocked on her open door. "How's the Thompson family situation developing?" Sarah looked up from the case file spread across her desk. The Thompsons were a perfect example of why the Family Services program was desperately needed. Both parents worked for Morrison Industries. Their youngest child had been diagnosed with leukemia, and the medical bills were threatening to bankrupt them despite their insurance coverage. "I've arranged for them to access the emergency medical fund, and scheduling is working out modified hours so one parent can always be at the hospital during treatments," Sarah reported. "But honestly, Marcus, this shouldn't have taken 3 weeks to coordinate. We need streamlined protocols for situations like this." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of systematic thinking Thomas was hoping you'd bring to this role. Speaking of which, he wants to see your preliminary report on program expansion." Sarah glanced at the thick folder on her desk. She'd been working on recommendations for scaling the Family Services program across all Morrison Industries locations, a project that would require significant budget allocation and executive buy-in. "I'm still finalizing the cost projections," she said. "Some of these initiatives would require substantial upfront investment. Thomas isn't concerned about cost if the programs deliver real benefits to employees and their families. He's more interested in sustainable impact." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's babbling from her crib. She had discovered her own voice recently and enjoyed lengthy conversations with herself, especially when she had an audience. Marcus grinned and walked over to peer down at her. "She's getting so big. How old now?" 4.5 months. "And she's definitely inherited the Morrison personality. She knows exactly what she wants and isn't shy about demanding it." "Speaking of Morrison personalities, how are things going with Thomas? I know this arrangement is still pretty new for all of you." Sarah considered the question carefully. Her relationship with Thomas had evolved from wary suspicion to cautious respect, but it was still complicated by grief, expectations, and the strange intimacy of shared loss. "He's not what I expected," she said finally. "When I first met him, I thought he was this cold corporate titan who saw people as assets to be managed. But watching him with Emma... She paused, remembering the previous evening when Thomas had spent an hour on her apartment floor, helping Emma practice rolling over while discussing quarterly earnings reports with someone on his phone. "He's trying really hard to be different than he was with Daniel." "Different how?" "More present, I think. More emotionally available. Yesterday, he canceled a board meeting because Emma was fussy and I couldn't get her to settle down. He just took off his suit jacket, picked her up, and walked around the office humming until she fell asleep." Marcus raised an eyebrows. "Thomas Morrison canceled a board meeting to help with a crying baby?" "I was shocked too. But he said the meeting could wait. Emma needed her grandfather." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at the memory. "I think losing Daniel made him realize how much time he wasted being unavailable when it mattered." Emma's babbling grew more insistent, and Sarah recognized the pre-hunger warning signals. She moved to the crib and lifted her daughter, settling into the comfortable nursing chair Thomas had installed in every office occupied by new mothers. "I should let you get back to it," Marcus said, heading for the door. "But Sarah, for what it's worth, you're exactly what this company needed. And I think you're exactly what Thomas needed too, even if he didn't know it." After Marcus left, Sarah fed Emma while reviewing the Thompson file. The medical expenses were staggering, even with insurance. The family was facing crushing debt. But the emergency fund could cover the shortfall, and the flexible scheduling would allow both parents to maintain their careers while caring for their sick child. It was exactly the kind of situation that had driven Daniel to write his letter about family-friendly workplace policies. Sarah could imagine him in some dusty outpost, thinking about the families back home, who were forced to choose between financial stability and being present during their children's greatest needs. Her computer chimed with an email notification. The sender was Eleanor Morrison, Daniel's mother, whom Sarah had never met. Her heart rate spiked as she opened the message. "Dear Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Thomas gave me your email address and told me about Emma. I know this situation must be overwhelming for you, and I wanted you to know that you have my complete support. I've been traveling extensively since. Daniel's death grief makes me restless, I suppose. But I'm coming home next week, and I would very much like to meet my granddaughter. If you're comfortable with that. I also want you to know that I think you're incredibly brave for reaching out to Thomas. I know how intimidating he can be, especially when he's trying to protect himself from emotional pain. The fact that he's opened his heart to you and Emma gives me hope that maybe we can all heal together. Would you be free for lunch on Friday? Somewhere quiet where we can talk and Emma can be comfortable? I have so many questions about Daniel's last months, and I imagine you might have questions about his childhood that Thomas is too emotionally guarded to answer fully. With love and anticipation, Eleanor Sarah stared at the email, feeling a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Thomas had mentioned Eleanor only briefly enough for Sarah to understand that their marriage had ended years ago, but that they maintained a cordial relationship centered around their shared love for Daniel. She was still processing the email when Thomas appeared in her doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have news," he announced, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The board approved your program expansion proposal." Sarah blinked in surprise. "But I haven't finished the cost analysis yet. I presented what you had so far, along with some additional research my team did on similar programs at other companies. The projected employee retention savings alone justify the investment, but the board was most impressed by your systematic approach to implementation." "Thomas, that's wonderful, but there's more." He leaned forward, his enthusiasm evident. They want you to present the full program to our regional managers next month. 15 facilities across the Midwest, all implementing family services programs based on your recommendations. The scope of what he was describing hit Sarah like a wave. She had started this job thinking small help a few families, maybe make things slightly better for working parents at one company. But this was something entirely different. This was the chance to impact thousands of families, to create systemic change that could ripple across an entire industry. I don't know if I'm ready for something that big, she said honestly. You're more than ready. You've already identified gaps in our current services, developed solutions, and started implementing changes that are making real differences in people's lives. The Thompson family alone has saved over $40,000 because of the programs you've put in place. Emma had finished eating and was now contentedly playing with the plastic keys that had become her favorite toy. She seemed blissfully unaware that her mother was being offered an opportunity that could define the rest of her career. What about Emma? If I'm traveling to present at different facilities, we'll figure it out. Bring her with you when possible. Arrange childcare when necessary. The company will cover all expenses, and you'll have administrative support for travel coordination. Thomas paused, then added more quietly, I meant what I said about not making you choose between being a mother and having a career. Emma comes first, always. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. 3 months ago, she had been facing eviction and choosing between formula and electricity. Now she was being offered a chance to build something meaningful, something that honored Daniel's vision while providing security for Emma's future. Your mother emailed me, she said, changing the subject to give herself time to process the job opportunity. Thomas's expression shifted slightly. Eleanor, what did she say? She wants to meet Emma and me. She suggested lunch on Friday. How do you feel about that? Sarah considered the question. Nervous, curious. I don't know what to expect from her. Eleanor is... Thomas searched for the right words. She's nothing like me. Where I tend to be controlled and analytical, she's intuitive and emotional. She was a wonderful mother to Daniel when he was small, but she struggled with depression after his birth. It put strain on our marriage that we never fully recovered from. Is that why you divorced? Partly. We were also just very different. People who wanted different things. Eleanor needed emotional intimacy and spontaneity. I needed structure and predictability. Neither of us was wrong, but we couldn't find a way to bridge the gap. Thomas looked out the window at the city below. Daniel got the best qualities from both of us, thankfully. What was she like with him? A genuine smile crossed Thomas's face. She taught him to see magic in ordinary things. Eleanor could turn a trip to the grocery store into an adventure, a rainy afternoon into an opportunity for indoor camping. She's the one who encouraged his creativity, his empathy, his sense of wonder about the world. That sounds like the Daniel I knew. Yes, he had my drive and determination, but Eleanor's heart and imagination, it made him. Thomas's voice grew thick with emotion. It made him extraordinary. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in memories of the man who had connected their lives in ways they were still discovering. I think you should meet her, Thomas said finally. Eleanor knew Daniel in ways I never did. She can tell you stories about him that I missed because I was too focused on work, too caught up in building the company to pay attention to the small moments that actually mattered. Emma dropped her keys and began fussing, the universal baby signal for I'm bored and need a change of scenery. Sarah stood and settled her daughter against her hip, swaying gently to soothe her. There's something else, Thomas said, his tone becoming more serious. I've been thinking about Daniel's letter, about his ideas for the company and for Emma's future. I want to establish a foundation in his name, the Daniel Morrison Foundation for Military Families. Emergency support, educational scholarships, job placement assistance for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Sarah felt her breath catch. That's a beautiful idea. I'd like you to consider heading it up in addition to your work here. It would mean more travel, more responsibility, but also the chance to help families who are facing some of the same challenges you've experienced. The offer was overwhelming in its scope and generosity. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was studying. The room with bright, alert eyes that so closely resembled her father's. Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sarah... Thomas stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. I need you to know that this isn't about guilt or obligation. You and Emma have become important to me, not just because of Daniel, but because of who you are. You've brought light back into spaces that felt dark for too long. The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep in Sarah's chest. Over the past weeks, she had watched Thomas transform from the intimidating CEO who had questioned her motives into a grandfather who sang lullabies and attended pediatric appointments. But more than that, she had seen him become the father Daniel had always needed him to be, just unfortunately too late for Daniel to experience it. You know what I think Daniel would say about all this? Sarah asked, adjusting Emma's position, as the baby reached for the light streaming through the window. What? I think he'd say it's about time. You stopped trying to prove you're worthy of love and started accepting that you already are, that you always were. Thomas turned from the window, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You sound like him. Daniel always could see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Then maybe we're doing something right. Maybe we're building the kind of world he wanted Emma to inherit, one where families matter more than profit margins, where people take care of each other, where love doesn't have to be earned through achievement. Emma chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, as if she approved of the conversation happening around her. Both adults laughed, the sound carrying away some of the weight of their shared grief, and replacing it with something lighter, more hopeful. Friday lunch with Eleanor, Sarah said decisively. And I want to hear more about the foundation idea. But right now, I need to finish the Thompson file and prepare for the afternoon staff meeting. Thomas nodded, moving toward the door. Oh, and Sarah, the board meeting I mentioned? They also approved funding for an on-site childcare center. Construction starts next month. Emma will have plenty of company soon. After he left, Sarah sat back in her chair, Emma contentedly babbling in her lap, and tried to process everything that had happened in the span of one conversation. 6 months ago, she had been a grieving single mother facing an uncertain future. Now she was being offered opportunities she had never imagined, surrounded by people who had become something like family, building programs that could impact thousands of lives. But perhaps most importantly, she was watching her daughter grow up surrounded by love, not just Sarah's love, but the love of a grandfather who was learning to express emotions he had kept buried for decades. And soon the love of a grandmother who carried her own stories about the man who had given Emma life. As she looked out at the Chicago skyline, Sarah allowed herself to believe that Daniel had somehow known this would happen. That his letter to his father, his ideas about family-friendly workplaces, his vision of a world where children didn't grow up feeling unworthy of love, all of it had been planted like seeds, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Emma reached up and grabbed Sarah's finger, holding on with a determined grip that already suggested she would be formidable in whatever path she chose. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Sarah felt genuinely excited about the future they were building together, all of them, bound by love and loss and the shared commitment to honoring the memory of a man who had believed that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they cared about each other. The restaurant Eleanor had chosen was a small bistro tucked away in Lincoln Park, the kind of place where mismatched furniture and exposed brick walls created an atmosphere of comfortable intimacy. Sarah arrived early, Emma secured in her carrier, and claimed a corner table, where the baby could observe the room without being overwhelmed by the lunch crowd. She spotted Eleanor Morrison immediately when she walked through the door. Daniel's eyes set in a face framed by silver-streaked auburn hair that caught the afternoon light filtering through the windows. Eleanor moved with an artist's grace, her flowing scarf and vintage jewelry suggesting someone who prioritized beauty over convention. Sarah? Eleanor approached the table with tentative excitement. Oh my goodness, she's absolutely perfect. Eleanor's attention went immediately to Emma, who was awake and alert in her carrier, studying this new person with the serious expression she wore when meeting strangers. Unlike Thomas's initial awkwardness around babies, Eleanor seemed completely natural. As she knelt beside the carrier, "Hello, sweet girl," she murmured. "I'm your grandmother, Eleanor. I've been traveling the world looking for pieces of my heart, and I think I just found the most important one." Emma, apparently deciding that Eleanor passed inspection, offered. One of her rare smiles, the full-face expression that transformed her from serious observer to pure joy. Eleanor gasped softly, pressing her hand to her chest. "That's Daniel's smile," she whispered. "Exactly Daniel's smile." Sarah felt her own eyes fill with tears. "She doesn't smile like that for many people. You must have passed some kind of test." Eleanor settled into the chair across from Sarah, unable to take her eyes off Emma. "Thomas told me she looks like Daniel, but seeing her, it's like holding a piece of him again." They ordered lunch, soup, and salad for Sarah, quiche for Eleanor, but neither woman seemed particularly interested in food. Eleanor was completely captivated by Emma, who seemed equally fascinated by this new grandmother who spoke in musical tones and wore jewelry that caught the light. "Tell me about his last months," Eleanor said suddenly. "Thomas mentioned that Daniel talked about me in his letters to you, but I need to know, was he happy? Before everything happened, was he happy?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think he was the happiest I ever knew him to be. He'd found his purpose in the military, and he felt like he was finally becoming the man he wanted to be rather than trying to meet someone else's expectations." What kind of man was he becoming? Confident, but not arrogant. Strong, but gentle. He had this way of making everyone around him feel important, from the youngest soldier in his unit to the Afghan children who followed him around whenever they visited local villages. Sarah paused, remembering. He carried pictures of those kids in his wallet, right next to Emma's ultrasound images. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That sounds exactly like the boy who used to bring home every stray animal in the neighborhood, because he couldn't stand the thought of anything being alone or unwanted." "He told me about the cat rescue phase," Sarah said with a small smile. "Oh, it wasn't just cats. We had a rotating menagerie birds with broken wings, a 3-legged dog named Champion, a rabbit that someone had abandoned at Easter. Thomas was constantly complaining about the chaos, but I caught him more than once sneaking treats to whatever creature Daniel had adopted that week." Emma began to fuss, and Eleanor held out her hands questioningly. When Sarah nodded, Eleanor lifted the baby with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, settling Emma against her shoulder and beginning a gentle swaying motion. "I was terrified when Daniel was born," Eleanor admitted. "Not of being a mother, but of failing him the way I felt like I'd failed at everything else. My depression made everything feel impossible, getting dressed, making dinner, returning phone calls. But Daniel, he saved me in ways he never knew. How? He needed me to be present. Not perfect, not successful by anyone else's definition, just present. When I held him, when I sang to him, when I read him stories, none of my other failures mattered. For those moments, I was exactly who I needed to be." Sarah watched Eleanor with Emma, seeing the natural maternal instincts that had been passed down through generations. "Is that when things got difficult with Thomas?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her hand making slow circles on Emma's back. "Thomas deals with uncertainty by creating structure and control. I deal with it by embracing chaos and trusting that things will work out somehow. Neither approach is wrong, but they don't complement each other well when you're trying to raise a child. What do you mean? Take discipline, for example. If Daniel broke something or misbehaved, Thomas wanted consistent consequences, clear rules, logical progression from infraction to punishment. I wanted to understand why he'd acted out, what he was feeling, whether the behavior was coming from a need that wasn't being met. Eleanor shifted Emma to face outward so the baby could observe the restaurant while they talked. The irony is that Daniel needed both approaches. He needed Thomas's structure to feel secure, and he needed my emotional availability to feel loved. But Thomas and I were so focused on proving our respective methods were right that we never learned to work together. Is that why the marriage ended? Partly. But mostly it ended because we stopped talking to each other and started talking through Daniel. He became our translator, our mediator, our emotional buffer. By the time he was 10 years old, he felt responsible for keeping us both happy. Eleanor's voice grew thick with regret. No child should carry that weight. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Daniel told me he always felt like he had to choose sides. That he loved you both, but could never figure out how to love you both at the same time without disappointing someone. That was my fault as much as Thomas's. I was so angry about what I saw as his emotional unavailability that I turned Daniel into my confidant. I told him things about my marriage, my feelings, my disappointments that no child should hear about their parent. Emma had grown sleepy in Eleanor's arms, her head settling against her grandmother's shoulder with complete trust. Eleanor looked down at her with an expression of fierce protectiveness. "I won't make those mistakes with Emma," she said firmly. "Whatever issues Thomas and I might still have, whatever complications exist in this family, Emma will never be put in the middle. She deserves to love all of us freely, without feeling like she's betraying someone by caring about someone else." Thomas said something similar, Sarah admitted, about not wanting to repeat the patterns that hurt Daniel. How is Thomas with her? With you? Sarah thought about the question. Different than I expected. He's still Thomas-controlled, analytical, used to being in charge. But with Emma, he becomes someone else entirely. Patient, playful, completely devoted, and with me. She paused, trying to find the right words. He treats me like family. Not like an obligation or a charity case, but like someone whose opinions matter, whose feelings are important. That's growth for him, Eleanor said with genuine surprise. Thomas has always struggled with emotional intimacy, even with people he loves deeply. The fact that he's opened himself up to you and Emma gives me hope that maybe we can all learn to do this better. Their food arrived, though neither woman showed much interest in eating. Emma had fallen asleep in Eleanor's arms, and Sarah found herself reluctant to disturb the peaceful scene. "There's something I want to ask you," Eleanor said quietly. "Thomas mentioned that you might be taking over a foundation in Daniel's name. Military Families, Veteran Services, he's proposed it. I haven't decided yet. I think you should do it." Eleanor's voice was certain. "Not because Thomas suggested it, but because you understand what those families are going through in ways that policymakers and board members never could. You've lived the uncertainty, the financial pressure, the fear of raising a child alone. But I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about caring for people who are struggling. You know about finding resources when there don't seem to be any. You know about making impossible choices and somehow finding ways to keep going." Eleanor looked directly at Sarah. "Those are the skills that matter. Everything else can be learned." Sarah felt a flutter of possibility in her chest. The foundation would be a chance to help families like hers, military wives and husbands facing deployment separations, single parents struggling with grief and financial insecurity, children growing up with the unique challenges of military life. "Daniel wrote about this, didn't he?" Sarah said. "About wanting to help military families." Eleanor nodded. "His last letter to me was full of ideas about programs for veterans. support systems for military spouses, educational opportunities for children who move constantly because of their parents' service. He said he wanted to use his trust fund to make a difference in people's lives rather than just accumulating wealth. What trust fund? Eleanor's expression shifted to surprise. Thomas didn't tell you? Daniel inherited a substantial trust fund when he turned 25. He never touched it, said he wanted to earn his own way first, then figure out how to use the money for something meaningful. Sarah felt a strange mixture of sadness and vindication. Daniel had died with the financial resources to provide for Emma's future, but he'd never told Sarah about them. It was so like him planning for their security while refusing to rely on family money for his own sense of worth. How much? Sarah asked quietly. Enough to fund a significant foundation indefinitely. Enough to impact thousands of families. Eleanor paused. Thomas is offering to match it with company funds, which would essentially double the foundation's resources. The scope of what was being proposed hit Sarah like a wave. This wasn't just about a job or even a career. This was about building something that could outlast all of them. Something that could honor Daniel's memory while addressing real needs in the world. Emma stirred in Eleanor's arms, making the small sounds that meant she would wake up hungry soon. Eleanor reluctantly handed her back to Sarah, who began the familiar routine of preparing for a feeding. I want to be involved, Eleanor said suddenly. With the foundation, with Emma's life, with whatever family we're building here. I know I have no right to ask for that, given how absent I've been. But losing Daniel made me realize how much time I've wasted running away from things that mattered. Sarah looked across the table at this woman who had loved Daniel in ways Thomas couldn't, who had encouraged his creativity and empathy and sense of wonder. Emma would need that influence in her life, the balance between structure and spontaneity, between achievement and emotional expression. What would involvement look like for you? Regular visits, helping with Emma when you need it, working with the foundation if you'll have me. I've spent the last 15 years traveling, photographing different cultures, documenting how families survive and thrive in challenging circumstances. Maybe that experience could be useful. Sarah felt something settle into place in her chest. The family that was forming around Emma wouldn't look like anything traditional. A young widow, a corporate CEO learning to be emotionally available, an artist grandmother returning from years of self-imposed exile. But it would be bound together by love for a child and commitment to honoring the memory of the man who had brought them together. Friday dinners, Sarah said suddenly. What? Daniel always talked about how he wanted Emma to grow up with family. Dinners with traditions that would make her feel connected to something bigger than herself. What if we started with Friday dinners? You, me, Thomas, Emma. Nothing fancy. Just regular time together where Emma can know her grandparents and we can all figure out how to be a family. Eleanor's face lit up with joy. I would love that. I could cook. I'm actually quite good in the kitchen when I'm not traveling. And I could tell Emma stories about her father, show her pictures from when he was small. Emma had woken up fully and was beginning to demand attention, her soft fussing escalating toward full complaint. Sarah shifted her daughter to her shoulder, swaying gently to soothe her. There's one more thing, Eleanor said. Something I brought. For you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, clearly vintage and obviously precious. This was my grandmother's. I gave it to Daniel when he deployed, told him to bring it home for the woman he planned to marry. I found it among his personal effects. Sarah opened the locket to find two tiny photographs, one of Daniel in his army uniform, the other an ultrasound image of Emma that she recognized from her 20-week appointment. He was carrying this when he died? Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. He loved you both so much, Sarah, more than I think any of us fully understood. This locket proves that he was planning a future with you, that Emma was already the center of his world even before she was born. Sarah fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of generations of Morrison women who had worn it before her. But more than that, she felt the weight of Daniel's love, his plans for their future, his hope that his daughter would grow up knowing she was wanted and cherished. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Thank you for loving him, for giving him Emma, for being brave enough to reach out to Thomas when it would have been easier to disappear. You've given us all a second chance at being the family Daniel wanted us to be." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Emma contentedly babbling in her carrier, Sarah realized that this lunch had been more than just meeting her daughter's grandmother. It had been the beginning of understanding how the pieces of their fractured family might fit together into something whole. Outside, Eleanor hugged them both goodbye, already making plans for their first Friday dinner. As Sarah watched her walk away, she touched the locket at her throat and felt Daniel's presence more strongly than she had since his death. Not the crushing weight of grief, but the warm certainty that love persists beyond loss, that families can be rebuilt on foundations of shared commitment rather than just shared genetics. Emma reached up and grabbed the locket, studying it with the intense focus she applied to all new discoveries. And Sarah had the sudden certainty that Daniel was somehow watching this moment, satisfied that the three women in his life were finally coming together around the little girl who carried his heart forward into the future. 6 months later, the Daniel Morrison Foundation headquarters buzzed with activity on a crisp October morning. Sarah stood before a wall of windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Emma balanced on her hip as they watched construction crews putting finishing touches on the new veterans housing complex across the street, the foundation's first major project. At 10 months old, Emma had developed distinct opinions about everything, especially about who was allowed to hold her and when. Today she was content to observe the construction equipment with the serious attention she gave to all mechanical things, occasionally pointing and babbling commentary that only she understood. "The ribbon-cutting ceremony starts in an hour," Marcus Williams said, approaching with a tablet full of last-minute details. "Channel 7 wants an interview after the mayor's speech, and the Tribune photographer is already downstairs getting set-up shots." Sarah nodded, still adjusting to the media attention that came with running a foundation that had captured the city's imagination. In 6 months, they had launched emergency assistance programs for military families, opened 3 childcare centers near military bases, and broken ground on affordable housing for homeless veterans. The success had been overwhelming, drawing attention from politicians, other nonprofits, and families across the country seeking help. "Any word from the Pentagon liaison about the national expansion proposal?" Sarah asked. Approval came through. This morning, 12 new cities, full funding for 3 years. Marcus grinned. "Congratulations, Sarah. You just went national." Emma chose that moment to lean toward Marcus with her arms outstretched, her universal signal for "I would like to visit with this person now." Marcus took her gladly, spinning her in a gentle circle that produced delighted giggles. "She's going to be running this place by the time she's old enough for kindergarten," he observed. "The way she's been studying financial reports during board meetings, I think you might be right," Sarah replied. "Yesterday, I caught her trying to eat the quarterly budget summary." The elevator doors opened to reveal Thomas and Eleanor arriving together, carrying coffee and what appeared to be a heated debate about something. Over the past months, Daniel's parents had developed an unexpectedly functional friendship based on their shared devotion to Emma and their mutual respect for Sarah's leadership. "The seating arrangement is perfect as planned," Eleanor was saying firmly. "Sarah should be at the podium, not hidden behind some panel of board members." "I wasn't suggesting we hide her," Thomas replied with exaggerated patience. "I was suggesting we acknowledge the other foundation partners who made this project possible." "Both of you need to relax," Sarah interrupted. "It's a ribbon cutting, not a state dinner. Emma's the real star anyway. She's wearing her best outfit." "Indeed, Emma. was dressed in a miniature navy blue dress with a tiny cardigan that Eleanor had knitted specifically for the occasion. The baby had developed strong preferences about clothing, and today she seemed pleased with her formal attire. Thomas moved to the window where Sarah had been standing, his expression thoughtful as he looked down at the housing complex. "Daniel would have been proud of this," he said quietly. "Not just the building, but everything the foundation represents." "He would have been proud of all of us," Eleanor added, settling into one of the comfortable chairs they'd arranged near the window. "Look what we've accomplished when we stopped trying to honor his memories separately and started doing it together." Sarah felt the familiar warmth that came with thinking about how much their family had evolved. The weekly Friday dinners had become the anchor of their shared life, sometimes at Sarah's apartment, sometimes at Thomas's penthouse, often at Eleanor's surprisingly cozy townhouse. Emma had grown up with 3 adults who adored her unconditionally while managing to maintain their own distinct relationships with each other. "Speaking of honoring Daniel's memory," Thomas said, reaching into his briefcase, "I have something for Emma, for when she's older." He handed Sarah a leather portfolio embossed with Emma's initials. Inside were copies of every letter Daniel had written home during his service, along with photographs, commendations, and personal mementos from his deployment. "His commanding officer sent these last week," Thomas explained. Stories from other soldiers about Daniel's service, letters he wrote to families of fallen comrades, pictures of the children in the village where he died. "I thought Emma should have a complete record of who her father was as a man, not just our memories of him as a son." Sarah opened the portfolio to find a photograph she'd never seen: Daniel surrounded by a group of Afghan children, all of them laughing at something off camera. His face was relaxed and joyful in a way that made her heart ache with missing him. "There's something else," Eleanor said softly. "I've been working on a project of my own." She pulled out a large photo album bound in soft leather. The cover was embossed with Emma's story in elegant script. Inside, Sarah found pages chronicling Emma's life from birth to the present, not just posed photographs, but candid moments that captured her personality as it emerged. Emma reaches for Thomas's glasses during a board meeting. Emma is covered in sweet potato after rejecting Eleanor's homemade baby food. Emma takes her first steps between Sarah's apartment and the coffee table where Thomas was reviewing foundation proposals. "I wanted her to have a record of being loved," Eleanor explained. "Not just by us, but by all the people whose lives she's touched just by existing." The final pages of the album were blank, waiting for future memories. Sarah traced the edge of one empty page, thinking about all the moments yet to be captured. Emma's first words, her first day of school, graduations, achievements, the ordinary milestones that would mark her journey from baby to child to woman. "The housing complex residents want to plant a memorial garden," Marcus announced, returning from a phone call. "Families who've been helped by the foundation programs. They're calling it the Daniel Morrison Memorial Garden." "What kind of garden?" Sarah asked. "Vegetables and herbs that residents can tend and harvest. They want it to be living and useful, not just decorative. Food that feeds families, community space that brings people together." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It was perfect, practical, and beautiful, nurturing and sustainable. Everything Daniel had valued in life. Emma had grown restless in Marcus's arms and was reaching toward the window, drawn by the activity on the street below. Sarah took her daughter and pointed toward the construction crews. "See that building, sweetheart? Your daddy helped design the programs that made it possible. All those families who will live there, all the children who will grow up safe and secure, that's part of your father's legacy." Emma babbled seriously, as if she understood the importance of what she was seeing. "The mayor's motorcade just pulled up," Thomas announced, checking his phone. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah looked around the room at the people who had become her family. Thomas, with his newfound ability to express emotion, Eleanor with her artist's eye for beauty in everyday moments, Marcus who had become both colleague and friend, and Emma who had somehow brought them all together simply by existing. "We're ready," she said. That the ceremony was everything Sarah had hoped it would be, dignified, but warm, celebrating achievement while acknowledging the ongoing need for support programs. Emma charmed everyone from the mayor to the news crews, babbling contentedly during the speeches, and clapping her hands when the ribbon was cut. But the moment that brought Sarah to tears came afterward, when residents of the housing complex presented her with a handmade quilt. Each square had been sewn by a different family, helped by foundation programs, and together they formed an image of hands reaching toward each other, a visual representation of community support. "This is from all of us whose lives you've changed," said Maria Santos, a young mother whose husband had been killed in Afghanistan 6 months before Sarah met Thomas. "You showed us that losing someone doesn't have to mean losing hope." As the afternoon wound down and media crews packed up their equipment, Sarah found herself alone with Emma on the foundation's rooftop garden. The city stretched out below them, busy with its usual energy, but up here everything felt peaceful and possible. Emma had discovered leaves recently, and was determinedly trying to grab the ones fluttering from a small maple tree Eleanor had planted in honor of Daniel's birthday. Each leaf that danced just out of reach prompted serious concentration and renewed effort. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," Sarah whispered, settling Emma more comfortably in her lap. "Not because of anything you've achieved, but because of who you are, kind and curious and brave. You're going to change the world, little one, just like he did." Thomas and Eleanor found them there as the sun was setting, bringing hot chocolate and the comfortable companionship that had developed between them over months of shared meals and shared purpose. "The national expansion is going to mean more travel," Thomas said, settling beside Sarah on the garden bench. "More time away from Chicago." "We'll manage," Eleanor replied firmly. "Emma and I can handle things here, and Sarah can focus on building programs that help families across the country." "Actually," Sarah said slowly, "I've been thinking about that. What if we didn't expand by replicating our Chicago model everywhere else? What if we instead created a network of local foundations, each one tailored to the specific needs of its community?" Thomas raised an eyebrow with interest. "Decentralized but coordinated." "Exactly. Train local leaders, provide seed funding and ongoing support, but let each community develop programs that address their unique challenges." Sarah shifted Emma to face them as she warmed to her idea. "The military families in rural Wyoming have different needs than the ones in urban California. Let's help them build solutions that actually work for their situations." "That's brilliant," Eleanor said, "and it's sustainable. Instead of trying to manage everything from Chicago, we'd be empowering communities to help themselves." Emma had tired of chasing leaves and was now content to sit quietly, leaning back against Sarah's chest as she observed the adults' conversation. The baby had developed an uncanny ability to sense when important decisions were being made, becoming still and attentive as if she understood that her future was being shaped by these discussions. "Daniel would have loved this conversation," Thomas said quietly. "He always believed that the best solutions came from listening to people rather than assuming you knew what they needed." As if summoned by her father's name, Emma looked up at Sarah with an expression of such awareness that all three adults felt their breath catch. For just a moment, it seemed like Daniel was looking back at them through his daughter's eyes, approving, encouraging, reminding them that love persists beyond loss and that the best way to honor the dead is to build something beautiful for the living. The Daniel Morrison Foundation would go on to help thousands of families across the country. Emma would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally by three adults who had learned to be better people because of her existence. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, a young soldier's dream of a world where families matter more than profit margins would continue to unfold, one life at a time. But in that moment on the rooftop garden, As Chicago settled into evening around them, Sarah simply held her daughter close and felt grateful for the journey that had brought them all together, a journey that had begun with collapse and desperation, but had somehow led to healing, purpose, and the kind of love that makes ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.